The afternoon of January 15th, 2009, began like any other winter day in New York City. The air was crisp, the sun weakly filtering through a pale, milky sky. At LaGuardia Airport, the usual rhythm of life unfolded. Aircraft pushing back from gates, baggage carts humming along the tarmac, and the distant rumble of engines blending into the background noise of a city that never truly sleeps. Among the flights scheduled that day was US Airways Flight 1549, a routine trip to Charlotte, North Carolina. For most passengers, it was simply a short hop down the East Coast, a commuter journey, nothing more. Families returning home, business travelers checking emails on their phones, and a few tourists quietly chatting about their time in New York. Nobody suspected that within minutes they would all become part of a story that would capture the attention of the entire world. In the cockpit sat two men whose combined experience represented decades of flight: Captain Chesley Burnett, Sully Sullenberger III, and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles. Sully was a veteran with over 19,000 hours in the air, a man whose calm demeanor and meticulous nature had earned him the trust of every crew he worked with. Skiles, though equally seasoned, was on his very first assignment in the Airbus A320 after months of training on the aircraft. The cabin crew, 3 flight attendants, moved gracefully through their pre-flight routines. Safety checks were completed, announcements were made, and boarding was smooth. Outside, the cold January wind swept across the runway, but the weather was otherwise perfect for flying. Clear skies, good visibility, and no sign of the storms that often plague winter aviation. At 3:25 p.m., the jet pushed back from the gate. Passengers buckled in as the engine spooled up with a deep, mechanical hum. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, joining the steady procession of departures leaving LaGuardia. From the cockpit, the skyline of Manhattan shimmered faintly in the distance, a sight both Sully and Skiles had seen countless times, yet one that never lost its quiet beauty. Moments later, clearance came through. US Airways 1549 cleared for takeoff. Skiles advanced the throttles. The engines roared to full power, pressing passengers back into their seats as the aircraft surged forward. The runway blurred beneath them, and then, smoothly, almost effortlessly, they were airborne. The climb was uneventful for the first 90 seconds. The plane banked gently to the left, following its planned departure route over the Bronx and toward the open airspace beyond the city. Conversations resumed in the cabin. The sound of the engines was steady and reassuring. And then, without warning, it happened. Through the windscreen, a dark, shifting cloud appeared. In the same instant, the cockpit voice recorder captured Skiles' startled exclamation, "Birds!" A fraction of a second later, a series of heavy thuds shook the entire aircraft. Passengers near the front heard the loud bangs. Those near the wings saw flashes of movement and a spray of feathers. Large Canada geese, each weighing several kilos, slammed into both engines at over 250 knots. The smell of burning filled the cockpit as the right engine lost all thrust and the left began to fail. Warning alarms erupted in a chorus of urgent tones. The Airbus was no longer climbing. It was slowing. In the cabin, confusion rippled through the passengers. Some thought it was turbulence. Others noticed the sudden drop in the engine noise and the subtle but undeniable change in the aircraft's pitch. Looking out the windows, a few saw the startling reality. The plane was losing altitude over the heart of New York City. Sully and Skiles had only seconds to react. In a situation where every heartbeat mattered, training took over. Sully took control of the aircraft, while Skiles began running the emergency checklist for dual engine failure. Both men knew the stakes. They were flying over one of the most densely populated cities in the world. A failed landing attempt here could mean devastation on the ground. LaGuardia? Too far. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey? Maybe, if they could keep their glide, but the odds were slim. Below them, the rooftops of the Bronx and Manhattan stretched out in every direction. Beyond, the ribbon of the Hudson River glinted in the winter sun, calm but icy cold. Sully's voice was steady, almost eerily calm. "We're going to be in the Hudson." And with that, the fate of Flight 1549 was sealed. The Airbus A320 was now a glider, silent except for the rush of air over its wings. Both engines had failed completely. From the cockpit, Sully could see the city stretching out beneath him, like a sprawling maze of concrete, glass, and steel. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the buildings, and far below, traffic moved in slow, oblivious streams. In those first few seconds after the bird strike, time seemed to slow. Sully's mind raced through the options, each one closing off almost as quickly as it appeared. Returning to LaGuardia was impossible. Their altitude was too low. Teterboro Airport was closer, but the distance and required turn were still a gamble. A failed attempt there would mean crashing into densely packed neighborhoods. The Hudson River, long and narrow, offered the only unobstructed path. It wasn't a runway. It was icy, unpredictable, and deadly cold. But it was straight, open, and free of obstacles. A water landing was dangerous and rare, yet at this moment, it was their only hope. Skiles worked the checklist for dual engine failure at lightning speed. In the Airbus manual, that checklist was designed for pilots at high altitudes, with minutes to spare. Here, they had less than 3 minutes before the ground, or the water, would meet them. In the cabin, the atmosphere shifted from mild confusion to quiet dread. Passengers exchanged glances, searching for answers in each other's faces. The flight attendants moved quickly, their voices firm yet calm. "Heads down! Stay down!" They knew there was no time for a full briefing, only for urgent, life-saving instructions. Outside, the skyline loomed closer. The aircraft was descending steadily, skimming just above the rooftops. People on the ground would later recall looking up to see a silent plane passing overhead, lower than any commercial jet should ever be. Inside the cockpit, the tension was absolute. Sully, his hands steady on the controls, focused entirely on glide speed, pitch, and alignment with the river. His training as a former Air Force pilot and safety expert was guiding every move. He didn't allow his mind to wander to the lives depending on him. Not yet. That wait would come later. "Brace for impact," came the announcement, firm and unshakable. The words rippled through the cabin like a cold wave. The Hudson was directly ahead now, its surface a shimmering strip of dark steel under the pale winter light. Ferries and small boats dotted its length, unaware of the drama unfolding in the sky above. The frigid water was barely above freezing. Anyone in it for more than a few minutes would be in grave danger. Sully lowered the nose slightly, trading altitude for speed. Too slow, and they'd stall. Too fast, and the impact would tear the plane apart. He leveled the wings, aligning perfectly with the narrow corridor of open water between Manhattan and New Jersey. In the cabin, some passengers gripped the hands of strangers. Others whispered prayers under their breath. A few, unable to process what was happening, stared blankly out the windows. The world outside was moving too fast, the river rising to meet them. Skiles called out the last of the checklist items, but there was no time for more. The Airbus sank lower and lower, the shadows of the skyscrapers sliding across its fuselage. Then, just seconds before impact, the aircraft cleared the final row of piers and touched the river. The landing was not a crash in the violent, fiery sense many feared. It was more like a sudden, forceful skip across the water's surface. The fuselage slammed down with a deafening roar, sending massive sheets of spray into the air. Inside, the impact threw passengers forward, their seatbelts straining against the force. Overhead, bins burst open, scattering luggage into the aisle. The plane bounced once, then settled, cutting through the icy water in a long, controlled glide. Spray pounded the windows. The sound was unlike anything the passengers had heard before, a deep, rushing hiss, mixed with the grinding of metal against water. In the cockpit, Sully kept the nose up, fighting to keep the plane afloat for as long as possible. Water landings were rare and notoriously dangerous. Even when successful, aircraft often broke apart or flipped. But this time, the Airbus stayed intact, bobbing gently in the river, drifting with the current. For the first time since the bird strike, Sully allowed himself a single thought. We might have done it. The Airbus floated in the frigid Hudson, its engines now silent, its sleek fuselage turning gently with the river's current. The sudden quiet after the chaos felt almost surreal, like the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it. But there was no time for relief. Inside the cabin, water was already seeping in through the rear. "Evacuate! Evacuate!" The command came from the cockpit, clear and urgent. Flight attendants sprang into action, their voices loud and steady despite the shock that still pulsed through their bodies. The passengers, disoriented and trembling, followed instructions as best they could. The forward doors opened, and the bright yellow escape slides deployed, instantly transforming into life rafts as they hit the icy water. Some passengers climbed out, their breath forming clouds in the winter air, while others helped those who were slower or injured. At the rear of the plane, the waterline was rising. The Hudson in January was brutal, its temperature hovering near freezing. Within minutes, it could strip away muscle strength and numb even the strongest swimmer. People wading into it felt the shock of cold like 1,000 needles driving into their skin. On the wings, passengers clustered together, balancing on the slippery surface as the plane slowly drifted. Some stood ankle-deep in water. Others crouched low to keep from slipping. From the air, helicopters circled, their blades chopping through the sky, filming what would become one of the most iconic images in aviation history: a line of people standing on a jetliner's wings in the middle of a river. Meanwhile, ferries and rescue boats in the area responded instantly. Captains turned their vessels toward the floating aircraft, plowing through ice and waves. One commuter ferry, normally used to shuttle passengers between New Jersey and Manhattan, became an impromptu rescue ship. Its crew tossed life rings and hauled shivering passengers aboard. In the cockpit, Sully made one final sweep, moving through the cabin to check for anyone left behind. He passed rows of empty seats, scattered belongings, and the faint smell of fuel mixed with the cold river air. He knew that in an emergency like this, no one gets left behind, not if he could help it. When he reached the back, water was knee-deep. He shouted, but there was no answer. Satisfied the cabin was clear, he turned and made his way to the door, the last man to leave the plane. By then, rescue boats had surrounded the Airbus. Passengers huddled together, wrapped in foil blankets handed out by ferry crews. Some were crying quietly. Others sat in stunned silence, processing what had just happened. One man, his voice shaking, simply repeated, "We're alive. We're alive." Minutes turned into an hour as the rescue unfolded. The cold was merciless, but the coordination between pilots, flight attendants, ferry crews, and first responders kept the tragedy from claiming a single life. Out of 155 people on board, all survived. Something so rare in aviation that experts would call it a miracle for years to come. Later, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, the damaged Airbus was towed to shore, its belly scarred, but still intact. The images from that day, passengers standing on the wings, rescue boats clustered around, would be broadcast across the world within hours. Captain Sully Sullenberger, and First Officer Jeff Skiles would face intense media attention, investigations, and even second-guessing in the months that followed. But the facts remained. In just over 3.5 minutes, they had taken a powerless aircraft over one of the most densely populated cities in the world and brought everyone safely to the ground, or in this case, the water. In the days that followed, passengers reunited, telling and retelling their survival stories. Some spoke of seeing the skyline from a terrifying angle. Others remembered locking eyes with strangers in silent understanding. Many said they owed their lives to Sully and Skiles. For Sully, the word hero was one he wore reluctantly. He insisted it was a team effort, that his co-pilot, crew, and the quick-thinking ferry captains all played crucial roles. But for the people who had been on Flight 1549, there was no hesitation. They had been given a second chance at life, and it was because of the decisions made in that cockpit. The Hudson River, on that cold January afternoon, had been more than just water. It had been a runway, a lifeline, and the setting for one of the most extraordinary chapters in modern aviation history. And for those who had stood on its icy surface, waiting to be pulled to safety, it would forever be the place where the impossible had happened, and every single one of them had lived to tell the tale. If you felt as excited listening to this story as I did telling it, don't forget to subscribe and give the video a like. Every day, I'll bring you a brand new story from the skies and the heart of the airports. Until our next flight together, take care.